listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Australia is known for having some of the most beautiful and picturesque coastlines in the world, but imagine walking down to your local beach and it's covered in foam and dead marine animals.
If this was happening on Bondi Beach and beachgoers in Sydney were seeing dead stingrays and mini sharks washing up on their beaches there at Bondi, there'd be a national outcry.
That deep dive into why the Prime Minister is being pushed to declare a national disaster in one state and who or what is to blame is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Wednesday, the 9th of July.
Hey, Chris, and to you listening, we're starting in the US, where 16 top Democrats are demanding the release of documents related to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, accusing the Justice Department and Attorney General of withholding them to protect the president. It comes just a day after the department and FBI released a memo confirming Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide in his jail cell awaiting his sex trafficking trial in 2019 and debunking rumours he was murdered, while also stating a secret client list didn't exist. And it's not just these Democrats that have weighed in. The Trump administration is also under fire from high-profile Republicans, including MAGA influencer Laura Loomer, for having previously promised the release of such records.
And no surprises, we've also heard from Trump's estranged first buddy, Elon Musk, who first insinuated the president was named in the files back in June after the pair fell out, and that is a tweet that he has since deleted. Since the memo, though, he's fired off a bunch of posts to X criticising the lack of arrests made in connection to Epstein, and just this morning retweeting this exchange between Trump and a reporter during a cabinet meeting hours ago.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable.
Yes, I mean, I guess some people could also argue that a sex trafficker or sex abuser would also be found to be unbelievable and disgraceful, but anyway.
Yes, one would think that, Tara, but look, Trump's MAGA allies have, spent years calling for more evidence around Epstein's client list because they believe that it has a lot of influential figures in that are named in those lists. This latest thing from the FBI is a little bit of a curveball for them, so it'll be very, very interesting to see if the administration change their tune on this one.
In the case that keeps getting stranger, celebrity chef Nagi Maehashi from Recipe Tin Eats has spoken out after her beef Wellington recipe became the centre of the mushroom triple murder case. The meal Erin Patterson used to kill 3 people and attempt to kill a 4th after lacing it with death cap mushrooms. Now, Nagi has posted to social media yesterday saying, "It is of course upsetting to learn that one of my recipes, perhaps the one I've spent more hours perfecting than any other, something I created to bring joy and happiness, is entangled in this tragic situation," Chris.
Oh, geez. I wish we could say the same about Erin spending hours to perfect it, because based on the photos that got released, Tara, that beef Wellington did not look delicious. Look, Nagi does say that this is all that she's been commenting on, and she's asked for the media to respect her privacy. Now, she's not the only person to comment since the trials wrapped up. The doctor, Dr. Chris Webster, whose phone call with an emergency operator we played yesterday, he's since spoken to the media as well, retelling the moment he says he knew Erin was, quote, a disturbed sociopathic murderer. Dr. Webster says it's when Erin told him she'd purchased the mushrooms from Woolworths.
Yeah, he says that if she'd admitted from the start that she'd picked the mushrooms, he may have thought it was actually a tragic accident and told the Herald Sun, quote, "But once she said that answer, my thoughts were, holy shit, you did it, you crazy bitch, you poisoned them all," and going on to say this.
From that moment, in my mind, she was guilty, she was evil, and very smart to have planned it all and carry it out.
And he went on to describe the murders as something from an Agatha Christie novel, Chris.
Yeah, I don't want to be like the boring person in the room who's like finger pointing here, but there's just something so wrong to me about a doctor coming out and speaking to media about this. Now, look, we know that doctor-client confidentiality and privilege exists for a reason. In this instant, that is voided because it's obviously gone through the court system and stuff like that. But in my opinion, it should have just stayed in the courts. There's absolutely no reason for him to be coming out, adding this commentary. And to be fair, I know she's a triple convicted murderer, but it's pretty harsh language from a doctor and arguably someone that we, everyday Australians, put our trust in. I would hate if this was happening to me.
Yeah, I think it's just the commentary, though. I don't see an issue with, say, if he came out and spoke about, the evidence or what actually happened, because obviously people are interested to hear that and they don't get those eyeballs in the courtroom like other people. But I think it's about the wording. And look, obviously this case, it's one that's incredibly bizarre. It's caught a lot of interest, female killer, very strange method, lack of clear motive. But it's also important to remember that these cases, they're people's real lives. People died, 3 people lost their lives, and some kids are going to be left without a mum. It's really tragic. And having done a lot of crime and court reporting, I've seen the families that are left behind in all of this, and we just need to keep them top of mind still.
Zachary Rolfe, the police officer who killed 19-year-old Kumanjayi Walker in the Northern Territory in 2019, has labelled the coroner's findings and her calling him a racist an overreach. Rolfe has released a statement via his lawyer saying he's entitled to a presumption of innocence and doesn't believe the coroner's findings are consistent with his rightful acquittal in 2022. Back then, he was found not guilty of murder or manslaughter over the incident.
However, Coroner Elizabeth Armitage handed down her findings from the inquest into the fatal shooting earlier this week, saying she couldn't rule out that Rolfe's racism hadn't played a role in Kumanjayi's death, with the teen shot 3 times during an arrest. And she went on to make 32 recommendations, including various changes for the NT police force.
I have recommended that its anti-racism strategy be strengthened, be targeted, made public, and compliance with its measures be publicly reported.
With Kumanjayi's cousin also saying this at the time.
When we heard the coroner say that there was structural and entrenched racism in the NT police, we felt validated as a family because to us, we felt like racism killed Kumanjayi.
And that's kind of a sentiment that's been echoed by some politicians, including Senator Lydia Thorpe, who kind of was like, oh, this finding is a little bit of like, oh, news at noon, the cops in the NT are racist. So interesting to see that that's echoed throughout the community. In Rolfe's statement, he went on to say that this was never about race and he felt the coroner went far beyond her remit, citing that an inquest is meant to determine the cause and circumstance of a death, not become a royal commission.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because one could argue that that's exactly what this coroner has done. She's determined the cause. And if that means going back and looking into the history of racism and where it began, what fed into it, the systemic issues in the force that developed those attitudes, then that to me is her doing her job. That's her finding the cause and circumstance of the death.
Changing pace now. If you're looking for warmer weather, cheaper housing and a job in construction, there's one Aussie state that needs you. It's the Sunshine State, Tara Cassidy's hometown, Queensland. New data by Infrastructure Australia has found it will have less than half the workers needed when construction begins next year for the 2032 Brisbane Olympics.
Yes, the forecast predicts at its peak in March next year, the state will need around 98,000 workers, but is estimating around 44,000 will be available. Deputy Premier Jared Blay says the government is confident it will meet the targets with $116 billion allocated in the state budget and plans to fill workforce gaps by attracting workers from interstate and overseas. Now, experts say this will require state and federal government cooperation with industry and unions, think like free apprenticeships, wage subsidies and types of incentives for entering the industry.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is necessarily going to work because we do have a national shortage of tradies at the moment. We also have an ageing tradie problem. We have very, very low enrolments in trades at TAFE and we have low amounts of young Aussies taking up apprenticeships. So it'll be very interesting to see how they're going to move the needle here. Like you mentioned, there are some tools at their disposal. Whether or not they can get them firing in time is something that time will tell.
And we are once again enemies, Chris, with our states facing off in the State of Origin decider tonight in Sydney. Around 80,000 fans are headed to Accor Stadium for Game 3, with Transport New South Wales reminding us this morning that ticket holders will ride public transport for free.
Oh, honestly, and it's the least that they can do after the train chaos and cooked public transport we have experienced over the last few months. But they do say that this is more to address the traffic concerns because driving around Homebush on Origin night or any given NRL day is a mammoth effort. So yeah, well done Transport New South Wales for this one.
Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, on a positive note, hopefully well done Queensland by the end of tonight, because they have a chance to become the first Maroons team to take the series with a Game 2 and 3 win on the road after losing their first game at home. Blues won Game 1, Maroons won Game 2, and hopefully Game 3.
Yes, I actually really do love a Game 3 decider. I know that it was looking like the Blues were going to have a really impressive comeback in Game 2, but honestly, the Game 3 puts so much more on the line, and it's such a better watch now that we're 1 for 1, and tonight will be the decider, and I will decide whether you and I will be friends tomorrow morning, Tara. That is it for headlines for today. Up next is my deep dive, looking into the toxic algae bloom that is spreading in South Australia right now and why the Greens are calling the Prime Minister to declare it a national emergency. Stick around, that deep dive is coming up for you next. Underwater Chernobyl, mass dead zones, and an environmental catastrophe years in the making. They're phrases surrounding our country's southeast coast at the moment. South Australian waters are currently experiencing an outbreak of toxic algae that's been starving marine life of oxygen for months, with hundreds of dead fish and birds now washing up on shores right across the state. The Greens are among those calling on the government to do more, with South Australian Senator Sarah Hanson-Young urging the Prime Minister to declare it a national disaster, not unlike what we see in response to floods, cyclones and fires. Sarah, welcome to the briefing. Can you paint us a bit of a picture? How exactly has your state's coastline changed in the last 4 months?
Well, it's been devastating, to be perfectly honest with you, Chris. And this is a algae bloom that has become so toxic that it is killing so much of the marine life. It started a bit further off in the coast, and it has just gotten closer and closer. And it's now washing up along the Adelaide beaches. So, I was down at the beach on Saturday. I run down there as many days in the week that I can get down there. And there was just dead fish, dead rays, dead, like little shark species just littered all over the sand right on the metro beaches. The fishing industry, of course, have been hit very hard. We've got a very successful fishing industry for our state, very well known for its clean, green image. And our tourism industry, of course, is very much focused on the coast and our coastal areas, and they're being hit hard too. So people are really worried. And, the scientists were warning about this for quite some time, saying that it was coming, that it is because of the warming of the ocean. And this little bacteria, this algae, gets into the gills of fish, and that's how they die. So it's just been devastating.
The state's Department for Environment and Water has pointed out, what you've just mentioned there, this ongoing marine heat wave as well as recent flooding as part of the picture as to why this is happening. But you've also suggested there's an industry that's flying under the radar here. What can you tell us about that?
Well, of course, the warming water is because of the climate crisis. And we know what is fueling the climate crisis. It is carbon pollution and emissions from the fossil fuel industry. And I must say, whether we're talking about floods or bushfires, I know on the east coast of the country there's been lots of weather bombs and bad weather this year that people have dealt with. This is another example of a situation that has been fueled by the climate crisis. And the fossil fuel industry are getting off scot-free, and they are making massive profits off the back of this pollution, and this pollution is literally now polluting our oceans and our beaches, and it's washing up on our shores every day. And the scientists and the divers that have been below the surface say that what they see down there, it's like a bomb's gone off. One fisherman described it as a Chernobyl under the sea. The beaches are graveyards, and underneath the water is just decimated. Santos is one of the biggest companies in South Australia, the big gas company that makes its profits off burning and exporting gas more and more and more. They want to expand. They're always asking the government for approval. They've got their hand out for taxpayer subsidies. Meanwhile, the fishing industry, the tourism industry, our environment, our wildlife is dying.
You mentioned there that what kind of started out along the coastline has now made its way to Adelaide beaches. So this is something that's spreading. Taken to its extreme, what are the implications of this if it doesn't get treated or if we don't get on top of managing it?
Well, it has been disappointing to see how slow the state government has been to respond. And frankly, the federal government has barely said anything about it. And so that's concerning, because what the scientists have said is that this could stick around for at least 18 months. The sea life beyond the animals, the sea grasses and the vegetation is being killed off as well. So that is going to require a huge amount of restoration. So, on one hand, the state government has been out saying, oh, it's the climate crisis, it's climate change, so we can't do anything. And I say, well, that's bollocks. The first thing we can do is stop making the problem worse, i.e. stop expanding more fossil fuels and more pollution. And secondly, we need to start investing in these mitigation and adaptation strategies, because the climate crisis is here. It is literally what we are seeing before our eyes, and we have to respond to that. And that means investing in nature, restoring nature, protecting nature.
Before we get on to some of the requests you've made of the Prime Minister and the federal government, I do want to ask your opinion on this. This is a story that hasn't received all that much national attention just yet. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, look, I think obviously it's been isolated to the South Australian coast, but I would say that if this was happening on Bondi Beach and beachgoers in Sydney were seeing dead stingrays and mini sharks washing up on their beaches there at Bondi, there'd be a national outcry. And the Prime Minister was pretty forthcoming about the use and crowding of cabanas over summer. How about what's going on our beaches in terms of our dead wildlife? So I do think it's a bit of an eastern state kind of, they're not really focusing on what's going on in South Australia. But it's time that changed, because this is a national crisis. And the thing is, this algae can keep travelling. And if we don't learn how to manage it here in South Australia, if it gets around elsewhere or develops elsewhere, how are people going to respond? South Australia's been wonderful when it comes to investing in clean renewable energy, right? We got out of coal years ago. We're leading the transition when it comes to renewables. But we are now at the cold face of the climate crisis. It's not all our doing. It is a national crisis, and we need a national response.
What role do you think, though, perhaps, a lack of care of the environment is playing in all of this? I know the conversation around the election is that with the cost of living crisis, global conflicts, and, oh my gosh, just everything happening in the world right now, people, unfortunately, their care for the environment started to slip, and some critics and some commentators said that we really saw that coming through at the election. Do you think that's playing a role in maybe why this hasn't become front news on all major mastheads?
I do think it's one of those issues where until it's in your face, it feels very far away. And that is the way it's been with the climate crisis for the last decade. Until there's a big flood, people lose their homes, their livelihoods, the bushfires. We're not thinking about the human or the real impacts that the climate crisis has on our lives. And that's what's happened here. Scientists wrote to the Environment Minister months and months ago and said, we can see this algae's coming, it's a problem, we need to get onto this, and they were ignored. But it's now on Adelaide beaches, and South Australians are red hot about this. We're asking for national help and support, and I think once people across the rest of the country really understand that, when we're seeing stingrays and massive amounts of fish, dolphins washing up on our beaches dead, this is the most brutal reminder that the climate crisis is here.
And you are calling on the Prime Minister to declare a national emergency. Can you explain to our listeners why that is important?
If we had a bushfire or a flood, the Prime Minister has the power to declare a national emergency, declare a national disaster, and that unlocks funding, resources, assistance. And I'm saying this is like a bushfire. This is like a climate-fueled flood. It's because of the warming oceans. It is because of the fossil fuel pollution now literally polluting our oceans and our beaches. It needs to be seen in the same category.
I was, trawling through some of the times when the Prime Minister and the federal government has unlocked this sort of funding in the past. Toxic algae growth wasn't something that fell on this list. It almost feels like an unprecedented request.
Well, we have to adapt, right? And this is part of the problem, that we've got these rules and these regulations that are not fit for purpose. when there's a bushfire, you know that there is this ability to respond. This is a bushfire in our ocean. This is a destruction of our marine life, and therefore the industries and the economy that rely on a healthy ocean and healthy beaches. Not to mention, just as a community, how we, like anywhere around the country, on the eastern seaboard or down south or on the west coast, we love our beaches. Australians love to spend time in nature, and they're being confronted now with our beaches being littered, and this will continue to happen if we don't get hold of it. People use these beaches. It first got detected because of surfers. They were in the water surfing and they started to get these rashes. They started to get sore throats. It was kind of this toxic stuff that they were breathing in. And they were the first ones to actually alert the authorities that had gotten as close to South Australia and to the Adelaide coast as it had. So it is impacting on what people can do. People are worried about letting their dogs go into the ocean now. And, they're running around on the beach and the metro beaches. They're worried about the impact that's going to have. And this is a devastation of our environment, but it is also having a huge impact on our community and our economy. And at the very least, South Australia should be getting that support from the federal government, just like people on the East Coast are getting support because of the weather bomb floods.
Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you.
That was spokesperson for the environment for the Greens, Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, speaking with me there. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. Don't forget, we'll be back in your feeds this afternoon with another episode hosted by Natasha Belling, and Tara Cassidy and I will be back tomorrow morning for another dose of headlines and an interesting deep dive. I'm Spyrou. Catch you then.